Everyone. Today we're speaking with J.Elle, New York Times best-selling author of House of Marionne, which is such a good book. Thank you so much for speaking with me. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So to start off, I read the book so quickly. I was so invested and it was so good. Would you mind telling everyone what the book is about?
Sure. So my short pitch is House of Marionne is sort of like Game of Thrones meets Succession with tiaras and pretty dresses. I've also heard it pitched as like Fourth Wing meets Bridgerton. To give you the synopsis, House of Marionne follows 17-year-old Kel, who is on the run because of a forbidden dark magic that she has. She's been on the run her entire life. When she's almost caught by an assassin hunting her from this magical order, she decides to flee to one of the training schools for proper magic. Her plan is to enroll there and master their proper form of magic in order to like bury her dark forbidden magic forever. Only her dark magic has no intentions of being buried, and she might be falling in love with an assassin in training from a rival house.
That was a great elevator pitch. As you said, this book feels like it's like Fourth Wing, Bridgerton, and like Shadow and Bone had a kid. And
Yeah.
it's a great combination. Those are like some of my favorite books. And I was wondering, like, where did you come up with the idea for the book? And like, did you pull from any of those stories?
Sure. So I was very inspired by lots of stories, but the actual book idea didn't come to me until I got an image in my head of a tiara growing out of a girl's skull. And so, like, when I saw that in my head, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so I couldn't like unsee it. And so I kept thinking about it all the time. And I was like, what would it be like to build a magic system around magic that did that? And so that's kind of where that was the impetus of the daydreaming, which became the world. And then yes, I am a huge fan of Lee's books. I love the Grishaverse so much. I also drew influences from Game of Thrones, which has a lots of I've heard a lot of readers say it reminds them a little bit of like it drew inspiration from Harry Potter, but I think it's more, and I think it's because of the houses. Like
Yeah.
people are familiar with houses and house
It's like
systems.
the school system with like you said, like the
System.
houses that kind of like I see where people are
Yeah,
getting it from.
totally. I think the houses remind me more of like Game of Thrones because you have these ancestral magical houses, these like deep-seated rivalries between houses. There's like court intrigue or political intrigue. So I think I pulled sort of my favorite things from a lot of my different books. I almost put actual dragons in this book, which is hilarious because when I wrote this, obviously, I had no idea Fourth Wing existed, but I do have figurative dragons in the book, and there is some shape shifting. The assassins can like turn into shadows. So there's just lots of really fun vibes from dark academia, from just like boarding school vibes, but then also like the epic big world that you get in a universe. I think that's one of the things I love about the book is it exists in an actual world that feels very fleshed out.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I loved it so much. And world building can be so difficult. And I feel like if you had added dragons, that would have been insane. Um, but yeah, no, I haven't seen Game of Thrones for
Obvious
obvious
reason.
reasons that we don't need to go into.
Books are better. You could just skip the show. I would just
I
whenever
want
the
to
time comes,
I
you could.
want to read the books
Yeah, they're
so
so
bad.
much better. And just like as a story, they're good. They're
Yeah.
adult, but they're good. So whenever the time comes,
The
I vote book over TV every time.
I always, same, always. I read a book before I watch the show so I can get my own idea of
Yes.
how the world is and how the
Yes.
characters are. And then I watch the show and I get to compare it.
Yes.
Book is always better. I'm gonna tell you. Book
Always
is
every
always
time.
better. Did you have the story like set in stone from the beginning, or did it like come to you as you wrote? Like when I'm writing, of course things kind of like change a bit and they go like fluctuate from beginning to end. But did like the key parts of the story kind of, stay?
Yes. Early on, I knew sort of the major bones of the story, actually, of the whole trilogy. So it's a three-book series. And so I knew sort of the big tentpole moments throughout the series, but it did like how I got there and sort of what the romantic arc looked like did evolve quite a bit. The role magic played evolved quite a bit. And also just like the dark academia setting, it came to life more like as I wrote it.
Yeah. The story was great, but I definitely like I'll be writing and I'll be like, "Oh wait, this character isn't really in there as much as I thought they'd be."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I figured that out the other day. I was like, "Wait, this was going to be a pretty big character. Now he's not. What happened there?"
It's the process of
It,
writing.
I'm learning so much.
Well,
It's
I cannot wait to read your books one day. This
one
is a,
day.
I'm assuming you're writing fantasy.
Everyone will find out soon, all in good time. But what is your writing process like? Like there's so many different ways that I'm like learning people write. And I was wondering what yours is because I ask this question most times and it always changes.
Mhm. It really depends on the book. So, House of Marion is my fifth published novel and the first in a new series. But the thing that's different about House of Marion is it's in such a big world, it's in a big fantasy world. So, the process was different. Usually, I will really play with the character a bit and kind of let them lead me into the world. And I sort of shape the world around the character based on what the character needs to go through and how they need to change. But because I had this very visceral image of a tiara growing out of someone's skull, I actually decided to go back and forth between what the world needed and what the character needed and look at the journey that they would be on and how I wanted to use romance to push that forward. And so this book started by creating, well, first of all, I did a zero draft. So I just did sort of a loose outline of general ideas I wanted to try. I was going to try a boarding school model, and I started to just kind of free write. It was actually November Nano. And so I was writing, and the goal for November Nano is to write 50,000 words a month. Well, I got to about 88,000, I think, or 80 something thousand at the end of the month. And I still hadn't finished the book. I would say I was probably about 80% through. And it was the first time. Again, no real outline, just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Okay. Just no, I mean, it was a mess. But there was a lot of fun things in it. So then at the end of November, I just deleted everything, all 80 something thousand words. And the reason I did that is because I knew I was like, this, I was like, this is not the story. What this is the aroma of the world. And so I had like lived 88,000 words in this world. I was like, okay, now I know the world. Now I have my sandbox full of sand. Now let me actually map out a story that goes in this world. And so I started over. And so when I started over, I was started by designing Kel and Jordan. Yagrin came to me first, actually. I had just finished reading A Darker Shade of Magic, the series of the different Londons with V. Schwab. And I just fell in love with the open so much. And it just sucked me into the rest of the novel. And so it was like, I want to write an open like this. And I literally, in fact, I'm going to see her next week. I'm going to tell her this because she doesn't know this. I literally sat down and I was like, I want to write a book that drags a reader into a story like this. And I sat down and I wrote my prologue, and it is the same prologue from that, however many years ago that was. So it really does ebb and flow. With this book, I had to let myself explore the world a lot. And so I did a
Yeah.
lot more of that. I have like a Wikipedia page. It's a Google document of like the history and how the magic works and the family lineages and like the old rivalries. And so I had never really done that before.
That, yeah, no, world building with the fantasy is so complex, especially if it's like an other world fantasy, because then you have to develop every single little thing. Like
Yes.
even naming a horse, people will be like, well, is this like your typical horse? Or is it
What kind of horse? A horse with four legs, a horse with a
exactly?
tail?
Does it have wings?
Yes, exactly. We
It's
need the
a
deep.
whole process. But the whenever you said you deleted the 80,000, like it hurt. I felt that to my core.
It was
That
so worth it though. It was so worth it.
well, I mean, the amazing story came from it, so it couldn't have been that bad of a decision.
That's very kind.
But how do you find like your characters' voices? Because for
Mhm.
me, I get like a journal that actually reminds me of the character, and then I'll journal in their voice to kind of feel like how they like what dialogue they might use and stuff like that.
Yeah, I do something similar. I don't have cutesy journals, though. That's an adorable idea. I might steal that. But I just like to just generally free write in their voice and just kind of get to know them. I think sometimes when we start with characters, they become sort of replicas of things that we know are comfortable. And then eventually, as you get to know the character, they take on their own voice. And so
Yeah.
they start to like morph into their own person once you understand their humor, once you understand their wounds, like what makes them laugh, what makes them sad, how do they handle conflict. And so once you sort of begin to realize who they are, I think it sort of, you kind of hone in on what their voice is like. And so, yeah, I just kind of free write and I
Yeah.
just play. Like in my early drafts, I'm not too hung up on how the character comes across. I'm really just trying to get into it. And I would say by about the 10th chapter, by about 10 chapters, like I'm in the voice, like
Yeah.
I'm immersed in the voice. So it's just exploring because you can't really plan it really.
No, you can't. It's funny. My mom doesn't know this, but I will be up until 3 a.m. in that journal. Just being like, oh, I gotta get this out. I definitely have fallen in love with the journal process.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that. And I love that the journal would be a reminder of the character because then you have at the end of all your books, you have all these collected journals and it's like little
Yeah,
pieces.
I have one, and it's like it kind of is fantasy-esque, but it's not for a fantasy character. But it just reminds me so much of her, and I'm like, this is literally the character. Throughout the book, there were so many amazing moments, and I loved, without spoiling anything, the whole part with like her grandmom near the end of the book, and that whole reveal there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pick my words so carefully. I'm like, don't spoil. Um, what was your favorite part of like the story or favorite scene, writing and reading it? It's probably impossible to pick. I know.
Yeah, it's hard, but I would say, interestingly enough, those are different answers for me. So my favorite parts to write were actually Yagrin's point of view.
Mm,
I really loved Kel's story, obviously, but my favorite part to write was Yagrin because Yagrin, it didn't have to be, I didn't have to paint the world in a certain way. Whereas with Kel, who is coming into this glamorous world, she's seeing all its beauty and she's very fixated on all the things in
yeah.
the world that are right and pretty and magical. Yagrin is just like jaded and bitter. And like I just felt so free in his head. I was like, I can literally write whatever. And so I really loved writing him. Reading, oh gosh, my favorite part to read was probably the dance scene. The dance scene and the beach. And you probably know
Yes.
the beach was like that
Yeah.
got me that feels.
100%. I agree. I agree with both of those answers. I love like reveals that make you go like,
Yes.
and that's what that one bit was for me. But 100%, the beach scene, so good. I
Thank
loved it. At the end of the book, you left on
you.
an amazing ending, great cliffhanger.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I'm sure you are working hard on the sequel. Could you give a little hint as to when to expect the story to continue?
Well, the plan is for it to come out around the same time next year, but the first draft is finished and I am known for my twists and endings, so I'll just put that out there. Um, book 2 is darker and more action packed, and there's a surprise third POV. Also, Yagrin is no longer a POV in book 2. Instead, we get Jordan.
Oh, I like that.
And the last thing I can sort of reveal is that we do not spend the bulk of the book inside House of Marionne. We actually get to go into other houses, 2 other houses.
I'm
So excited that you're excited.
I don't have anything
So
to say.
hard on
I'm
those
so
houses.
excited for that. That's amazing.
I'm excited for readers to see in the other houses because it's been fun for people to like fan out over House of Marion. I'm like, but you have to see the other houses. And then I think we really see the, readers identify with certain houses and the things that they love in those houses.
So with the houses bit, if since we're seeing other ones, I know you said it's not like Harry Potter Hogwarts houses, but do they each have their own different type of like theme?
They have their own culture.
Okay.
They have their own culture because, and I explain this a little bit more in book 2, you get a lot more of the history and lore in book 2. Um, the houses did not all, they used to be governed by one central, like, council, if you will. And then that council mysteriously disappeared all on the same day. And so then the headmistresses rose to being in power. And what they agreed was, we are going to treat our houses as our own houses. So we're going to do what we want in our houses, and we're just going to agree on the major things. And so that was the point in their history where the houses really became their own flavor. And sometimes to their downfall, there used to be 5 houses. There are now 4 because House of Duncan got too wild and they got shut down. But I love that each house has a different flavor. They have a different motto. And then, of course, if any listeners have the book or are getting the book, make sure you flip to the back, because there's an appendix with all of the house, like their slogans, their colors, their motto, and a little bit of their history.
I have the book right here. I'm going to look. I'm looking.
It's fun. And that section in the book, that appendix, is going to grow over the books, because that's the thing about fantasy. Like, if it was up to me, I'd have put another 100 pages in of just world building, but obviously that would have messed up the pacing.
I love it. I didn't even see that in the first.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm gonna actually read that bit at the end now, whenever we're done.
Well, now you know 2 of those houses, not House of Marionne, but 2 of the other ones, I won't say which, you'll get to see very, very detailed in book 2.
Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait. Do you have any like advice for aspiring writers? Because I've been, writing a bunch, and like I said, I'm learning so much about the whole writing process. And is there any tips that you would give?
Yes, absolutely. So the one thing that I say is advice that I got early on in writing, and I didn't understand it until many, 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 many years later. And it was respect the process. And what that meant, what that means to me now, because it might mean things to different people, but what it means to me now is that the writing takes the time that it takes. And like, sometimes I think, especially when you've written multiple books, you want to sit down and get out the story and feel like, okay, this is right. Like, objectively, I'm writing this story correctly. And like, there's a process to the way ideas develop, and they need that space to really mature and breathe. And so I think sometimes, especially like by my fit, like writing the second book in the series, I was like, I have completely forgotten how to write a chapter. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Who am I? And I think that that's just part of the process. Like, you have to allow yourself and give yourself permission to like not do it correctly, and to make messy mistakes, and to like write things that don't make sense, and just like explore, because out of that, I believe you find your best creative inspiration.
That's true. I never considered that. Like, whenever you do a new book, you kind of have to, it resets a bit.
It does. And it's really bizarre how you go from like finished draft to new draft, and you're like, I how do I do this?
How
Like,
do I
I
function?
don't know. I don't know how to do it.
Thank you. I know that there are probably a bunch of people watching, listening, who maybe want to become an author one day. So that's great advice. Kel had an amazing, amazing journey throughout the book, learning about the magic system and eventually how she didn't really fit in it like she was told. Did you grow with the character and kind of experience that character arc? And how did it feel writing it?
In ways, not completely. Obviously, I don't secretly have magic, unfortunately. But
Oh my God, it comes out. She has magic.
the truth.
Oh
This is not growing out of my skull. Um, but I went to an elementary school where there weren't a lot of people that were similar to me in many ways, socioeconomically, racially. I just felt very different from people. And so I found that in that environment where you're around no one that's really like you, and you don't have anything in common with anybody, human nature is to want to assimilate and sort of erase yourself and fit what they are accustomed to. And so I thought that would be compelling to explore in a story,
yeah.
especially for someone like Kel, who hasn't seen this world. She's been pulled away from it and then is thrust back into it. And she has to decide, like, how much is this worth? Like, how much is it worth to fit in this place? Is it worth every part of me? I mean, it's a pretty sweet setup. So, I mean, it's hard to walk away from if she doesn't want to do it. So, I thought that would be fun to explore. And I think, yeah, I think those pieces of my experience from elementary school played in for sure.
Yeah, I loved her character arc. It was amazing to read, seeing her, at the beginning just not knowing anything about this world because obviously her and her mom have been running from it for her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So it was so great to see her kind of figuring it all out and getting her own take and opinions on how she fit into it.
Yeah, that part. That part.
I loved it. It was great. So, I mean, it's so rare that a main character is my favorite character. I'm such a side character lover, even in my own writing.
Same.
I loved Cal so much,
Oh,
which I almost never say I loved a main character. I loved her, and like I said, I loved her journey. What was the character that you related to the most? I mean, there's so many amazing ones, and obviously what you just said about Kel and
yeah.
fitting in might contribute to that.
Hmm. I actually haven't been asked this before. I guess. Ooh, that's hard because they're all morally gray. Whose morally grayness do I want? Okay, there's a bit of Jordan in me. There's some surprising. There is I mean, obviously Kel, but I feel like that's the easy answer because of what we talked about. So I think I would say there's a bit of Jordan in me and maybe the grandmother. Because it in both Jordan and the grandmother, without any spoilers, they both have a like deadly desire to uphold like the standard of what things should be. So much so that they like when things aren't working or when there are cracks, like they just don't want to see them.
Yeah.
And I do feel like that's so relatable. Just like in so many different parts of my life, it's like, gosh, I am just such a like painfully optimistic person. And all my friends are like pessimists. So they're like, why do we keep you around? And so I was like, you keep me around because you're all pessimistic.
I'm always the person to find the silver lining. Always.
Always. Me,
Always. I'm like, I mean, you never know.
I know. You never know. Find that sparkle. But there's something about that very idealist sort of POV that I think there's a seed of that in Dara, but there's definitely a seed of that in Jordan. I think it manifests horribly. Like Dara is like hard and brittle to her grandmother, and Jordan's a jerk. But like in the core of who they are, they
Yeah.
have a very high respect of like what magic should look like and how the order should function. And of course, magic and or the order don't function that way, but there is a love of like the ideal, and I relate to that.
It's more of a love for what it should be and not what it is.
100%. I could not say that better.
Thank you
You're welcome.
so much for talking with me. It was so great to learn so much about, the book, the writing process, everything. And I cannot wait for the second book. Everyone, please, 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 if you haven't read House of Marionne, go read it now. Please. I beg of you. It was so good. I loved it so much. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.